So, if memory serves correct, are we not on the book of Esther? Yeah. So, last week we hadn't met Esther yet, had we? So, we're kind of aware of how the palace operates. And what went on between King Xerxes and Queen Vashti? Yeah, so she kind of gets unceremoniously canned because she kind of, well, disrespects him on at a time when, well, shall we say, many officials through the empire are at the palace, and she doesn't do her queenly obligation, and so, right? So he says, "Hey, this isn't good," and so we're going to find so Esther starts out in I think it's the third year of Xerxes' reign. And as we make our way through chapter 2, we're going to find out that in the 7th year of Xerxes' reign, we'll hear that reference. So that's 4 years. So that's 4 years. Now, that's not to say that there's a 4-year gap, but there is a significant gap of time. And we covered that last week when there was this war with Greece that Xerxes was leading, and the Persian navy just gets trounced. And so because of that, Persia will really never be a threat to Greece anymore. And of course, Greece will continue to rise and ascend and eventually vanquish Persia. Okay, so these are kind of the beginnings of the end of the Persian Empire. Okay, and I think Xerxes might have a sneaky feeling this might be so. But, you know, as often is the case, it may take a couple generations for things like that to happen. So, anyways, we're on lesson 3 of Esther, okay? And so Xerxes out of the picture. Esther doesn't officially say what happened to her, but it seems as if she's banished. Because in today's text, we get a sense that Xerxes kind of rues the day which he bloop, and you can kind of see how his court people respond, and the way that they respond makes you think that she still could be recalled, but of course that would undermine his authority, because if you make an edict like that, it's never supposed to be rescinded. So, you know, in a sense, as to show the seriousness of it, that even the king himself may not rescind an unrescindable edict, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're now going to start chapter 2, and today we're going to try to finish chapter 2, and I think we should. So this is pretty good. 1 chapter last week, 1 chapter today. Wow, I'm on a roll. I need to put lessons together more often at 2 in the morning. Okay, so let's read the first verse. Now I'm just going to read Xerxes because Ahasuerus is hard to say and just sounds weird, and we're used to Xerxes just through, you know, our history that we learn, you know, everywhere else. So after these things, when the anger of King Xerxes had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed against her. Now, this doesn't seem like anything, but remember can carry with it a note of compassion that often is not the case in English. And that seems to be the case here. So he's reminiscing, and he's thinking, she shouldn't have done what she did, and la 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 la. But I was really harsh. I wonder if I overdid it, and I shouldn't have banished her. I mean, this is kind of the implication. And remember, doesn't have to be that way in the Hebrew, but when we see how the court kind of responds, I think that makes sense on how we should understand that. See, so he's kind of regretting the severity of the punishment he doled out on her, and the structure within the Hebrew kind of amplifies this and intensifies it. So the structure also kind of conveys that. If we kind of look on page 1, See? So after these things, when the anger of King Xerxes abated, he remembered, and you can kind of see this buildup, especially in the Hebrew, at Vashti. Okay? So in other words, that's Queen Vashti, right? Et Asher Asatah, what she had done. Et Asher, right? So Nigzar Aleha. So you can kind of even sense the kind of the sound of it and the repetition also. What he had decreed against her. So you see this intensification, right? And so, and it's so in this lengthening series, it's 2, it's 3, and then it's 4. So this intensification lets us know that, yeah, this isn't any old regular remembering. This is ruining the day remembering, okay? And so, so we want to kind of understand the form of the text and kind of, so that's what's happening. We're not going to get this in English because English is primarily interested in translating the content of the words. But if something is conveyed in any other way, we usually don't get that. Okay? So there is King Xerxes. He's like, right? Second thoughts. He's a human being. So let's read verses 2 through 4, and let's kind of see what's going on within the empire's courtly happenings. Okay? Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king." Okay, what's happening here? I mean, this earlier happened, and right? And this edict went out and all this other stuff. So this is later when now the palace is what's the southern expression? Slap plumb full, right? Slap plumb full of young marriageable virgins. Okay? Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem of Susa in the capital under custody of Haggai. He's like the head eunuch. So what we're going to find out is that there are two harems, okay, that King Xerxes has. And so we have a harem of women whom he has not experienced, and a harem of women he has. That's as politely as you can put it. Okay? So, different era, different ways of operating, and so that, it's, so, okay. To gather all the beautiful young virgins in the harem under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Okay? Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. So, it's not as if, though, right? I mean, the edict really was made in chapter 1. And so, there are now lots of women, okay, and so when the underlings of the king say this, it's not as if, oh well, we're going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait a year because they're going to go through this whole year of beauty treatment, etc., etc., etc. Right? So this is to what? Distract the king. So this could be done because, well, the king, you made an edict, and if you rescind your own edict, you're undercutting your own authority, right? But it could also be, what could be a subtext of this? Why would they be scurrying around? I mean, in a sense, you'd go, who do I care as queen, right? I mean, I'm just going to serve whoever is there. That's my job. I'll do So why would they be scurrying about like this? They probably don't like her. Oh, we don't, in case King Xerxes loses his head and rescinds the order, we don't want her back, right? So this kind of lets us know that perhaps, right, there was more to her than just simply defying the king. And so we can kind of see this in between the lines of the response. Okay? Because if they really loved her, they go, oh, well, hey, let's just dilly-dally around, so, right? Because she really took care of us, right? Or whatever it may be. So we can kind of get a sense of those things, okay? So now, what we know so far about their criteria. What's the criteria when the edict went out? So the king can find a new queen. What were the initial qualifications? Beauty? Virgin. Yeah. Which probably means young, right? So, generally speaking, the older we get, hey, so I'm getting older, so I'm speaking of myself, right? And, I was looking at a younger picture of myself, and I'm thinking, am I the same dude? I'm like, wow. Have I changed that much? So, yeah. Okay. So at present, Esther really has no qualifications. She may have qualifications, but at this point, the only thing we really know about her is what? She's beautiful, and she's a virgin. Nothing else. So she could be a ditz. She could be a woman of no character, but she meets those two qualifications. Okay? Now, hey, we know that's not the case, but I'm just saying at this point, we're going to pretend like we haven't ever gone over the other parts of the book of Esther. Okay? So let's read verses 5 through 8, and we'll see what's happening. Now there was a Jew in Susa. Now, where is Susa? Or what is Susa, if we want to say that? It's the capital city of the empire. Though there are other seats of power, because Persia is big, and so there are other seats of power which help manage all the geographical distant reaches. But Susa is where the king's main residence and palace is. Okay, so this lets us know that this is taking place there. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel. There was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai. So he's not only in Susa, but the citadel is what? We would call that part of the king's palace. But the citadel involves more. It's also kind of the protective boundaries and the walls, that sort of thing. So that way, if a foreign army invades, there are actual physical barriers to help slow down or prevent a complete overrun. Okay? Whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. So, come on in. So Benjamin, which tribe of Israel is Benjamin? It's a small one. Does anyone have a lesson? So go ahead and have a seat, ma'am. Okay, so we're going through the book of Esther right now.
Oh, good.
So we're in chapter 2. So now, if you happen to be like a Hebrew scholar par excellence, let me know if I mess up in private. All right. So, okay. So Benjamin's one of the smaller tribes, okay? But that just kind of lets us know Mordecai's lineage, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah. Okay, now Hadassah is Esther's real name or Hebrew name. Okay, remember, it's not weird if you're living in a multilingual society to have different forms of your name. Read through the Old Testament and you're gonna hear so-and-so who is blah, blah, blah. And one may be the Aramaic name and one may be the Greek name. So it's not weird, okay? So Hadassah is her Hebrew name, and it's really based on the word for myrtle, like the myrtle tree, okay? So he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. So mom and dad have died. So The dad is Mordecai. Not biological father, but dad. Okay? The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. So she does meet the requirement. Remember, Xerxes said, hey, right? Send a message out to scour the kingdom for beautiful virgins. So, okay. So she looks like she can become part of the king's royal, right? So this is kind of, in a sense, even maybe a little kind of, because the edict went out a while before. So this is really kind of a retrospective. It's going back as to, even though it's written in the present tense, this has happened earlier. Okay? So Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. So Haggai is a eunuch. So which back in those days, if you kind of, right, if you helped take care of the king's women, your parts weren't fully functional. Okay? And that was by, so that way, right? And this was quite elaborate. I mean, because the king wants to make sure the kids are his own, not somebody else, right? Not the mailman's kids, right? So, and this kind of, so, they serve and they attend the women, and they're also bodyguards and whatnot. So, and we find this weird, but if you read through, because this was very common in Chinese history. So there was a well-known naval commander in the Chinese Navy, Cheng Ho, from ages past, right? And he was a eunuch, and so he was always like, why do all these guys waste all their energy and time chasing women? He just thought it was a complete waste of time and energy, right? And he could productively use his time in better ways. Well, so when some of your bits are removed when you're a child, you never mature. See, so if that happened to you, then you could probably be a trans athlete and not have a physical advantage. So why did I even go there? So I don't even want it, because that stuff, I just go, why are these guys are cheating? That's not fair. So, okay. So here we have it. So that's kind of the situation. Who is Esther? We know that she is Jewish. We know that she is beautiful. We know she's a virgin because she's going to be in the king's court. Her mom and dad have died. Mordecai is basically her dad who raises her. Okay, so she's going to treat him as she would her father. Okay, let's look at, so in verse 8, what's happening? So that when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther was taken into the king's palace. And he's under Haggai's kind of watch. Okay? So let's take a little excursus on page 2, Esther under the custody of Haggai. Okay? This is a little side blurb to kind of let us know how the palace kind of operates. Okay? Because it's not like we go, oh yeah, our White House runs the same way. I don't think so. And if it did, it would have to be really secret. Right? Because there would be a huge furor, right? I would think. Okay. So what we understand of the Persian Empire, Esther traveled to the palace and entered the virgin's harem. Each young woman brought into this harem went through a rigorous year-long preparation before she spent the first night with the king. Okay. For the first 6 months, Esther received oil treatments of myrrh to soften her skin. The second introduced her to perfumes and cosmetics. So we kind of know this stuff from secular history. We can piece the scriptural text with secular history and kind of come up with kind of a composite as to how this stuff works. And so this actually helps us understand the text of Esther when we have a good understanding of actual history. During this time, Esther also received training in court etiquette. Hint, don't be like Vashti. So she probably started out okay. But but when you disrespect the king in public, right? So she learned the sexual art so she would understand how to please the king when he called for her. Okay, not trying to be weird here, just saying what is. Of course, she would not lose her virginity during her training. No, such a thing is only for the king. After her training, Esther will go before Xerxes to spend a night with him. The next morning, she won't return to the harem of virgins, but to the harem of concubines. See, so that's why it said 2 harems. So the writer of Esther is assuming we know that one is for the virgins and one is for the concubines. Okay? Which is kind of weird. So even if he has an official queen, what's the king doing? Okay. If Esther pleased and delighted the king, he would invite her to spend more time with him. But if he found her unremarkable, Esther might spend the rest of her life forgotten. If so, she would remain a concubine of the king and little more. Because you're now part of, right? And so unless somehow you get a release, man, I guess it would be okay because you're not going to starve, right? You're going to get the best care, but wow, I don't know. I kind of think it would be not the best life, really? Because one would hope that, that there's a whole lot of stuff that you can do, right? And we know if you kind of check, if you look into courtly life of various kings and empires, if you become the king's favorite, even if you're a concubine, you end up wielding lots of power. So this could be a pathway to power. If someone so chose that, okay? I think we just kind of find it odd and oppressive. Okay. So let's look at verse 9 because this is now going to give us insight. So how did Esther end up in the palace, or shall we say the citadel? Did you recognize that verb? And it's an accurate translation. It says she was taken. It's like, this is just the way it is. So we don't know whether she wanted to go or not. Probably didn't. But that's beside the point, right? You're part of an empire and it is what it is, which is hard for us to kind of understand. Okay, but let's look at verse 9 because now this is going to give us a clue into who Esther is. And so there's like these Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs that are in the text of Esther, and we do well to kind of notice them. And the young woman that is Hadassah, right? Hadassah, Esther, okay, pleased him. Who's the him? Well, she hasn't yet seen the king. So this is the eunuch in charge of the harem, Haggai, and won his favor. Okay, and he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best palace in the harem, or best place in the harem. What? So who is this Esther? Right? And it's interesting because the Hebrew text uses an idiom, but it changes it. Okay? Because what we're going to find is that so find favor is the idiom. Right? And that's, we even in the New Testament we hear, right? And she found favor in God's eyes. Right? But this isn't found favor. This is won favor. So Nasa, not Masa. Notice the sound. Nasa, won. Masa, found. So in other words, this is the result of her doing. So whoever she is, she must be exceptional. Okay? And so the head eunuch's taking care of her. And you go, oh, well, maybe he just really likes her. But the whole point is that he may really like her, but he also knows that she's exceptional, and he wants to take care of her as best as possible because he says, oh man, she's exceptional, and I know the king will like her. And if the king likes her, and I show her favor now, how does this work? You scratch my back, I scratch your back, right? So he's using this like putting money in the bank. So this is just like, who is she? Wow, we don't know. But this little bit lets us know. And see, remember when we kind of looked at the overlay of Esther? Now we're going to start to see where she is switching from passive to active. And then later on, it'll be from active to commanding. But we don't want to get too far ahead. So we can kind of see. So for her to be this way, this isn't just some skill sets or people skills that she developed once she goes, right? She had these. Now, she may nurture them and cultivate them, but she has these, and now she's advancing. And the way the Hebrew text says, it's because of who she is. Okay? All right. So let's continue on because we still want to make our way through. That's the wrong lesson. That's Colossians. That's an oldie. We don't want to go back to Colossians, do we? Let's look at verses 10 and 11. Okay. Esther had not made known her people or kindred. What does that mean? She's Jewish. Right. So, sometimes you could look at someone and go, oh, well, you kind of look this or that, but you can't always say with certainty. And so we're really speaking of kind of, well, I guess, I don't know if the Babylonians are Semitic peoples. I'm not sure. But Persians, they would say, of course they're not. Though if you go to the Middle East, today if you were to look at an Iranian, and you may or may not be able to tell a whole lot of difference, because Iran is really kind of the descendants of Persia. And they speak a different language, and, that's okay. So anyway, so let's continue on. Let's look at verses 10 and 11. Okay. Esther had not made known her people and kindred, meaning she has not revealed that she's Jewish. Okay. Now, from what we know about the Persian Empire so far, would this in and of itself be a big deal? Not on the surface. Because Mordecai, right, is he not a servant of the king? Okay. And Haman, okay, we haven't yet really found out who that scoundrel is, but he is not Persian. Okay, he's an Agagite. We'll get into that later. But his sons have Persian names. Okay, so okay, and that's not weird. So my mom's Japanese, but I have a standard American name, right? Not a Japanese name. Okay, so which is often the case, right? So especially by the third generation, then usually by then, if there is any language that still exists of the motherland or fatherland, it's only in a sense understandable to the ear, but maybe not speakable. I mean, that's kind of how. And so the Persian Empire allows other people groups to ascend and do well. Okay, which means that there is a form of meritocracy within the empire. Okay, and so otherwise, if it was really a bad deal being a Jew, the Jews are conquered peoples, but then basically almost everybody in an empire is a conquered people. That's how it works. And then once you're part of melting pot or fruit cake, however it works, then you work within however things function and go that way. Okay. So for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So Mordecai says, hey, it could be to your disadvantage. Don't make a big deal of it. He's not telling her to recant the faith. He's just saying don't advertise your religion or ethnicity, because being Jewish was considered an ethnicity. I mean, it was tied to belonging to a nation that was conquered. Okay? And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Okay, so he's a member of the king's court, though kind of on the outer reaches, so he just can't wander everywhere. But he's able to get access where he can kind of like go to the edge and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Or getting news. So this is important because we're going to find out as Mordecai continues to kind of get to know people and work within the courtly system to find out how Esther's doing, he's going to come across other information. Okay? So as far as the people of the palace know, do they know Esther is a Jew? No. Somebody may. Okay? I find it hard to believe that no one would not, that, you know what I'm saying? Because even as a conquered people within an empire, you will still have certain practices that would kind of bespeak of your origin, okay, on your upbringing, okay. Well, let's discuss the morality of Esther's actions in her situation. It's like, well, why is she hiding this? Well, yeah, but it's kind of like, should we hide our faith? I mean, in a sense, that's what he's telling Esther to do. Yeah. Believe in private.
Well,
But
probably ate pork and things like that if it was served, because otherwise they know.
I bet you. And then, so how do we, I mean, if you're of course, if you were Jewish and you were taken into captivity, your entire life is upended. You can't go to the temple, right? And the temple, that's the center of religious and national life, right? And now that's gone. So how you practice your faith has definitely, it's as if the temple's gone and you only have a malformed version of the synagogue. Okay? The equivalent of that in Christianity would be, because what did the temple become in the new covenant and what did the synagogue become in the new covenant? Let's think this through, right? The synagogue service became the service of the word. And the temple became the service of the sacrament. So that's, the early church said, well, how do we understand worship but fulfilled in the new covenant? And so from the earliest beginnings, that was word and sacrament. So it would be as if, as Christians, no supper ever, right? And only a malformed service of the word. Okay? And so it's, what do you do? So if any of you are familiar with Japanese history, the church existed for generations, hundreds of years underground, only at home because it was illegal. And if you were caught, you were killed. Okay? And so, when Christianity was no longer illegal, well then, right? Oh, well, there's this, and it was odd, but it was a form that survived. And of course, its geographical center was Nagasaki, which we destroyed in World War II. So, shame on us Americans. All right, let's press on. Okay, verses 12 through 14. Are we ready? Okay. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go to King Xerxes, after being 12 months under the regulations for women, so going through that whole beauty treatment, learning courtly etiquette, which is a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, it's not just, how do you address the king? How do you show deference to him? There's this whole slew of things. It's like if you work for the king of England, there's this whole slew of protocol that you're supposed to follow. Okay, yeah, geisha is very formal, right? And geisha is not geisha. To be a geisha is a whole bunch of stuff: music, conversation. So it's not prostitution as we understand it. Okay, and I would say, even though this is so weird, this is not only sexual. Okay. So, and we kind of need to understand that. Okay, so this whole year of preparation, okay, and 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. So it would be like, I'm tired of going to the spa. I went to the spa yesterday, right? That would kind of be the big complaint. Okay. When the young women went into the king this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Let's unfold that one. Why would it even matter that she could take whatever she wanted from the harem to the king's palace? What? Well, she's got to move from one harem to the next. But how critical is it for her to leave the next morning and the king goes, whoa, she's exceptional. I don't want to forget her. Because, if you have hundreds of women, right? Poor Solomon, man. How could he even keep up with all that? I'm really good at music. So I might take a musical instrument. So the whole thing is you want a happy king. See? And that's a whole person thing. Of course, you don't go there and you don't tell the king no if he wants to frolic with you. If he wants to get fresh, wants to have sex, whatever you want to call it. Okay? So think about that for morality. So here Esther is part of this. What do you do? Right? In a sense, she's caught up in this maelstrom, and this is just how it is. Right? So I remember having a conversation with my dad about the Holocaust. Because my dad, he was like a super brainy dude. Spoke a number of languages and knew history really well. And so he was smarter than me. So he was telling me that he had read something that a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust had written. And he was moved by this, and he said that the Jews' job in the concentration camp was to survive. Now that doesn't mean to be unethical or to stomp on other people. But the point is that you need to endure this and go through it, so what? So you can reconstitute, right? And so in this case, this would be that their Judaism didn't die, okay, in the gas chambers. And so I guess you could kind of say that this is something similar. So Esther is doing things that she normally would not do. And yet what options are? Well, kill me, right? And she says, well, no. I could do better by working within the system. And that's the tough part. How do you know when you're selling your soul? And how do you know when you're actually doing something good? These are things that the book of Esther causes us to ask, because we know Esther does do good. And yet, we would have to say, there but by the grace of God go I. Esther, even though the Hebrew text doesn't mention God, it's a book of grace. Okay? So these are the things that we're kind of forced to contemplate. Okay? So when Esther goes before the king, she can bring whatever she wants. And this is so that way King Xerxes will remember her. Who knows what it is, right? Whether it's a special piece of clothing or musical instrument, or who knows. Doesn't tell us. But this kind of lets us know that's the case. So it's not just, go to the king only. Okay? So she was given whatever desire to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Sha'ashgaz. Help! Help! The king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines, the other harem. Okay? She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So this is no one approaches the king unless summoned. This isn't like in England where Queen Elizabeth lived into her 90s. I mean, in the old days, being in charge was very dangerous. People are going to kill you, people are going to poison you, whole slew of things. And so you're not being paranoid when you say nobody may approach unless I summoned him or her. Okay? It's necessary to live a long life. Okay? Because, hey, that's how it is. Okay? So at verse 15, let's read that one, okay? So are we good so far? So we're going to continue. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, so this is really Esther's dad, okay, who has passed away, okay? So, and Abihail means my father is strength. So kind of interesting because is she a chip off the old block, right? Will she have a lot of strength? So, okay. So when the turn for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Whoa. So Haggai has inside information. He really says, whoa, Esther, I really like her. And so he says it's in my best interest. He probably personally likes her, and it's probably in his job's best interest, right, to advise her well. So he's given her good info. This is what you should do. He knows the king. He knows what he likes, and he says, this is the best way that you can please him. Okay? Now Esther was, check this out, not finding. Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Again, this is her doing. Her character, her personality, the way she carries herself, everything. She's impressive. So, I would say she has charisma. Okay? And so people want to be around her. I mean, it's not just that she's pretty to look at, she's beautiful, but there's something about her, right? Because sometimes you'll come across somebody who kind of has this sort of whatever it is, and the person may not always be attractive, but whatever it may be, where people just what? Yeah, I wish I could be like him or her, or whatever it may be. Well, she was a believing Jew. We would say the term Christian did not yet exist, but did she have faith in the Messiah, the Christ to come? Yes. So she had faith. She had faith in the Messiah, the promise of the Messiah, who wasn't even yet born. But that's how it was in the Old Covenant. All that stuff pointed forward. All those sacrifices pointed forward to Christ's sacrifice on the cross. So in the Old Covenant, you see the seeds of what Christ will establish in the New. Okay? So we will say that, yes, she is of the same faith, though on the other side of the cross. And so things look different, okay, than in the new covenant. Okay? So okay. Oop. I flipped the page, so yeah. Okay. Well, okay, I kind of, anyways. So we'll stop there. We're not going to go and ask the question. There's the implication that Esther kind of went in with nothing, but there's a qualification. So the implication may be that she just went in without any of a musical instrument or whatever that may be. But we can't say that for certain, okay? Because she went in with nothing except, we don't know what Haggai told her, okay? So we don't want to, even though that could be that, that's not a firm statement, okay? So let's continue on if we're ready. Let's look at verses 16 and 17. Let's see kind of what happens, okay? Because now it's slowing down, right? And now it's focusing on Esther and the specific events in her life. And when Esther was taken to King Xerxes into his royal palace, listen to this. This gives the date, this date. In the 10th month, which is the month of Tabeth, in the 7th year of his reign. This lets us know that this is real, okay? Because it's giving us a month. It's giving us a year, okay? The king loved Esther more than all the women. And she found one. Notice that repeat? She won. Okay. Now, grace and favor in it, which is weird because you're thinking, wait a minute, you don't win grace. But this is just to let us know, who is this Esther? So, if we were hearing this in the Hebrew, we would all be going like, I wish I was alive when Esther was alive. I would love to meet her, right? I mean, wow. Okay, so won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So, wow, how sudden was this? Hard to say, right? But, it wasn't years later. So, then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. Meaning what? It was in her honor. It was for her. See, remember earlier there was his feast, and then Vashti kind of had her own feast at the same time, which, hello, that's not really smart. A competing feast when the king is holding one, and then when he says, hey, at least kind of make a public entrance and but right, what does this tell you? He's smitten. And he has it bad. At least so far. Right? Okay. It was Easter's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with his royal generosity. Okay. So all the kingdom will be happy. Even if they don't know who Esther is or care who she is, they just go, oh, this is pretty cool, right? So it's like, oh, I don't have to pay taxes this year? Oh. So if taxes go down, I think for a second, well, somebody has to pay for the government. So that floats in my head for a couple seconds, and I go, yay! And I do right? So, okay. So this is, wow. Just the kind of the situation and everything is changed. Let's look at the bottom of page 2 because, let's look at the graphic. The implied reversal is fulfilled. So this is from Esther 1, okay? On the 7th day, Xerxes sent 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti into the king's court, but she refused to come. So remember that? That was like, so here, in the 7th year of his reign, so these are things that happen, but the writer writes it in such a way so that we should see a connection, okay? So, and that's through the number 7, okay? So Esther is what? Right? So she's filling the vacancy of Vashti, and she's the queen. She's the real queen, what a queen should be. Right? And so that's kind of what we can kind of get from, the 7 here. Okay? It's not just coincidence. Okay? It's put in there to make that kind of link. Okay? So, what the text earlier implied through 7s it now overtly states Xerxes set a royal crown on Esther's head and made her queen. So, yay, Esther! Yay, Esther! Even though we're kind of sure that Esther is a form of Ishtar. But, so, what if anybody could take a pagan god's name and sanctify it? She can. All right, are we ready to continue on? Let's look at verse 18, okay? So, then the king gave it, we read that. Okay, so here we go. Now what we're going to find out is a little bit about Mordecai, her uncle, who's really her dad. The Greek text in edition A tells some additional info concerning his discovery of a plot. We'll get into that. But I only bring out like one verse that helps give us information because it's not that helpful, that part of the Septuagint. So we'll primarily stick with the Hebrew text here. Okay, so let's look at verse 20 and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so Esther had not made known her kindred or her people. So what is she continuing to do? Yes, she's not publicly making known that she's Jewish. Okay? So in a sense, she's kind of hiding it. Though I'm sure in private, she's saying her prayers and whatnot. Okay? As Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So she kind of sees this as honoring mother and father, right? Even though he's technically not her father, right? So, the fourth commandment is really what? Not just mom and dad, but those in authority over us whom God has placed there, right? We honor and respect them as we can. Okay? So that's still the situation. Okay? Now let's look at the Septuagint. This is in the middle of page 4, which is the Greek translation, and we know the Septuagint here has several additions to the Hebrew text. So Esther had not revealed her heritage as Mordecai had commanded her when she was with him. Now the Septuagint, which is to fear God and keep his commandments. So the Septuagint mentions God, but the Hebrew text does not. So Esther did not change her way of life. What does that mean? So she did not change hiding her belief, her religion, her faith. But notice this is her way of life. So what's that? She still believes. She's still Jewish. She's just not publicly proclaiming it. Okay? So she's not forsaking her faith, her religion, her heritage. Okay? But she's keeping it hidden. Okay? All right. Let's look at verses 21 through 23. We're getting close to finishing, which kind of matches the closing time, okay, of Sunday school. If I could find, okay. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now, recognize what this is. He's not just like sitting in a chair chewing on some tobacco, right? That's, in other words, a lot of the business that takes place is done at the king's gate, where regular people can come and air their grievances to a representative of the king who is seated there. Which means the person who is there, right, has the king's ear, has the king's trust, because he doesn't want some yo-yo out there making stupid proclamations in the name of the king, undermining his kingdom, right? I mean, that's what happened with David, right? You read the Old Testament with Absalom, and Absalom goes out there and, right? Well, if I were king, right? While he's chopping away at his dad's rule and authority. Okay? So Mordecai is vested with authority to what? To serve the king and represent him to the people who come to him. So that's what that means. He's just not sitting there. Oh man, I'm unemployed. No, that's not the case at all. Okay? So in those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, more names, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. Okay. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. So, I better let my king know, but also let him know who found this out. Okay? When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Okay, so one thing to kind of be aware of is yada in Hebrew is know, okay? But come to the knowledge. So this kind of carries some freight with it. So, and the freight that comes with it isn't that Mordecai just happened to overhear, right? So remember, he's kind of going and he's checking to see how Esther's doing. So he's getting to know people, right? And so, the eunuchs, which help manage the harems, they know him. And so it isn't simply overhearing, but he heard about it in some active way, perhaps through another party. Okay? And so this kind of shows that he too is kind of active. Okay? Which is kind of interesting. Okay, so which makes me think, well, where did Esther kind of get this kind of American attitude of let's do it, right? Isn't that kind of our traditional American kind of attitude? So here we have two Jews who think they're Americans long before. So. But yeah. So that's kind of there, and so we can kind of see, not only is she her father's daughter, a woman of strength, but she's her uncle's daughter, who makes things happen. Okay, and then of course, what does Xerxes do? He records it. Now this isn't weird, okay? Because Xerxes was kind of obsessive about this. We know this from history. And so he wants things recorded, okay? So later on he could go back and what? Like, something weird happened. Well, was there any kind of inklings of this that I didn't know at the time? And was it recorded? And can I extrapolate? So it serves a purpose. It's not just vanity of, record what happens in my empire. This actually serves a good purpose. And we'll find out later that it does. Okay? But this matches kind of the secular accounts of him as well, that Xerxes was meticulous and wanted stuff recorded. Okay? And next week we'll start in chapter 3, and we'll come across, or we'll get to know a particular figure named Haman. You guys were supposed to chime in when you heard the all right. Thoughts, questions, discussion? Yeah. I just think, I think Esther is kind of a good kind of contemplative text, even though we may not think it's the case, of how do we live out the faith when maybe we should hide it. And the question is, of course, we shouldn't. But is there a time? See? And so these are things that we don't want to do based on our sinful self-preservation, but in gospel freedom, of what makes best sense looking at everything that we know. Okay? And in a sense, for Esther, she was relying on her uncle's wisdom. Well, my uncle is a member of the king's court. He understands all this stuff that's going on a lot more than I do. And even though there are Jews in the kingdom, the empire, he must know that, they're still not quite ready to accept a Jewish woman, something along those lines is my guess. So, well, Mordecai is her uncle. Because remember, her dad died. And so Mordecai is the one who actually raised her. So, I'll say he's her dad, but not her father, biological father. Okay? So, these are things to kind of let percolate in the back of our mind. Because, you'd go, well, really? When Esther's presented to the king, she knows full well she's there to have sex with him and more. Okay? And to think that she's not, come on. You're living in fairy tale land. So, well, let's pray and we'll make our way to the service, shall we? Our Father, Esther certainly does give us much to think about, and yet in her we could see a wondrous woman whom you blessed with many gifts, who use them in a wondrous way. As we continue to have the text unfold before us, let us just amaze at what happens and how you use her in a wonderful way to save a people through whom the world's Messiah will come. In our Savior's name we pray. Amen.